How desperate does Georgia finally winning the national championship make Auburn, and why is that so hilarious? We did a segment on this, I don't know if it was last year or earlier in 2021. There's a very, very interesting dynamic, specifically in the Georgia-Auburn rivalry, that if you've been around it, you know, but if you haven't been around it, you don't really get it. So it's an intense rivalry. They call it the Deep South's oldest rivalry. But there are a lot of rivalries in college football. This one was kind of unique because even though Georgia has had the far more consistent program over the last 15 years, whereas Auburn's had a couple of spikes and then they've had very mediocre seasons and some bad seasons, Auburn's always had one trump card that they could pull out of their back pocket. Even if a Georgia fan had them totally cornered and they were following the debate through to a logical conclusion and they were 9/10 of the way there, Auburn fan only had to do one thing, and that's reach in their back pocket, pull out that 2010 national championship and say, where's yours? You're 33 years old. You weren't even born the last time they won one. Shut up. And for a long time, that shut you up. You had to swallow it, and you either had to reverse course or deflect to a new point in the debate. But now, guess what happens? What happens is you've had the more consistent program over a long period of time. You've had the upper hand in the rivalry for quite a while, and you just won a national championship. So that age-old trump card that they could pull out, you didn't rip it up. It's still there, but you got one in your back pocket now that looks a whole lot shinier and newer because it is. But what I've said about Auburn in years past is I'm not saying that they are happy with Nick Saban being at Alabama by any stretch. They despise every cell of the guys being up there. But they've come to accept what Nick Saban at Alabama is. And they've come to accept they don't really it may come as a surprise to you, they don't battle Alabama in recruiting. This is a huge misconception in the recruiting world. If you live in, let's say, Pierre, South Dakota, and you kind of follow recruiting, but you just assume some things. You would assume Alabama and Auburn probably fight it out on the recruiting trail every year. They really don't. They don't compete for the same kids more often than not these days. And it's not that Auburn's kind of white flagged it, but they understand where they stand in the pecking order versus where Alabama does. And they've accepted it even though they don't have to like it. But I've always said they can't have Georgia be there too. They cannot have Georgia also ascend to a level where they look and say, well, we can't match that either. You can't do that because, number one, you play both of them every year. Number two, they're your two biggest rivals. And number three, your fan base looks around and says, hold on a second now. I've got friends who live up in Noonan who are Georgia grads, and I donate the same amount they do. I got buddies who live up in Pelham who are Alabama grads. My check looks no different when it goes to Auburn than Jerry's up in Mountain Brook does when it goes to Tuscaloosa. So why should we accept scraps when they get filet mignon, as we would say in Harris County? You got a good point. And that's why I think this dynamic will probably shift here. Now you got to look at Auburn. There is no more uncertainty around any program in the SEC right now than at the Auburn University. Not the University of Auburn, Auburn University. No one knows what's happening. You got coaches looking at the exit door. Derek Mason looks to be heavily involved with the defensive coordinator position at Oklahoma State. That is also something we're keeping a close eye on. And this time last year, I was thrilled that Brian Harsin was able to get Derek Mason. It doesn't appear that there was a lot of gelling that went on. You heard later in the year, those two didn't even really talk to each other all that much. What a dynamic. Head coach and defensive coordinator not really communicating all that much. I don't really know how you function as a football program like that. But be that as it may, then you heard the Brian Harsin smoke. And the thing about it is, Harsin, just as a guy, just as kind of the way he carries himself, kind of seems like the coach that I want to root for because he doesn't really suffer fools, and he's very hard-nosed, and he's process-oriented, and he has the way that he's going to do things and doesn't really care if you like it or not. Those are normally attributes that I admire in a coach. Having said that, there's also a certain level of communication and a certain level of cohesion that you have to have. You have to blend into the fabric of wherever it is you are, in this sport at least. It doesn't feel like he may have done that down there. And so people don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty around the future of Auburn. And the reason I'm teeing that up like this is because if there are changes, I'm not telling you anything's imminent, but if there end up being changes in the next 24 to 36 months for Auburn football, how critical will that hire be? They're all critical. But think about how critical that would be when you've got Alabama just what they have been for a long time. But then you got Georgia ascending to who knows what level. I can assure you LSU's not going to get worse under Brian Kelly. And oh, by the way, Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M are about to lock up the highest rated recruiting class in history. And you got to play every single one of those teams every year. That is a third of your schedule. 33% of your schedule is made up of Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Brian Kelly, and Jimbo Fisher. You want to talk about a pressure cooker. That is why I continue to maintain when you factor in everything, this is the toughest job in America. No, it's not as easy to win at Miami of Ohio as it is Auburn. Absolutely. It's a tougher thing to try and achieve at a high level in the AAC than it is in the SEC. But here's the thing about it. When you're at East Carolina, they don't have the expectation level they do at Auburn. Auburn's got sky-high expectations, rightfully, in my opinion, because of the fan base. They invest just like the other fan bases do. They're not going to look around and say, all right, we're still going to invest in an A level, but we're just going to accept C-plus results. It's not the way it works in the real world or in this world. It's not the way it works. That's the toughest job in major college football right now. Brian Harsin's got it. I don't know for how long, but Brian Harsin's got it. But that whole dynamic and Kirby Smart winning a national title at Georgia, you can't imagine, unless you're really close to it on the ground, you can't imagine the pressure that already was there, how much that temperature knob gets turned all the way past 10 to 11. Very uncomfortable times.